From FingerLakes1.com and presented by FO1 Radio, I'm Josh Durso, and this is Inside the FLX. Our program today begins 2 years ago. That's when New York's 54th Senate District met Rose Town Supervisor Kenan Baldridge for the first time. He was running for state Senate. The Democrat was unsuccessful in that bid as Senator Pam Helming won a three-way race to succeed longtime Senator Michael Nozzolio, but he's back and challenging again. Supervisor Baldridge is our guest this hour to talk about his campaign issues and much more. Supervisor, thank you very much. Welcome back.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm sure you've been very, very, very busy,
Yes.
as campaigning can be. But for those who might not remember you from the last time you were on, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with politics.
Sure. Well, that goes back to 2011. I was kind of finishing up a long career in healthcare and human services, and I had always been interested in public service and decided that that was the year to run for town supervisor and came up with a number of issues. There was a Republican incumbent, and that also was a three-way race. There was an independent candidate. Decided it was time to actually go door to door and get involved on some what I thought were important issues. So I did that, won a narrow victory, and have just finished up my fourth election. I'm just starting my fourth term, 7 years, 2-year terms, and got reelected last fall. And the Democratic Party had a number of successes around the county. So, but we'll get to that in a little while. My background there is I'm fifth generation in Wayne County, born and raised in North Rose. In Wayne County, born in Lyons, raised in North Rose. Lived most of my life there. Been involved in the fire department. I'm 42 years in the fire department, and was the captain of the ambulance squad there, which was the bulk of their business at the time. 11 and a half years on the school board, North Rose Wolcott School Board, and generally involved in the community for decades, helping to build and better the community in any way I could. Especially with my time on the school board, I came to learn how much Albany controls what's done at the local level through a combination of law, regulation, and funding or lack of funding, and certainly the unfunded mandates that we all rue. So when Senator Nozzolio decided not to run for re-election, I thought this is the opportunity. It wasn't the best timing for me, but I decided I have to step forward and make my views known and try to go down to Albany and get some things done. As you know, that didn't go as well as I had wanted. So back to being town supervisor and also sitting on the county board of supervisors, trying to make change and get things done as much as possible. But the reason I'm here today and in this campaign is after watching the incumbent senator proceed through her term, I came to the fairly easy conclusion that not much was happening, and she was a profound disappointment. Things that she had said were of interest to her to get done in Albany have not been done. They have not even been attempted that I can see. I think she has voted against people. She has voted against the fire department. Even though she hands out money, she has voted against the fire department in terms of repealing important protections for firefighters. She has not taken up the cause of women's rights, which of all people, a female candidate should be doing that, but she's not, and I intend to. She has voted to repeal important protections for abused women. The SAFE Act, which currently allows for firearms to be taken out of the homes where there's an order of protection. She voted to repeal that, and I've said I will vote to keep that. And I can't see any noticeable success in the environmental realm. The three biggest landfills are still here. They're still active, and they don't appear to have any change in the future. And I think that's a real mistake. I think we need to do something about that, and the solution to that problem is in Albany, not here. And we still have this really terrible opioid problem that we just got to get our arms around and bring it to some successful conclusion. And it's not going to be to arrest everybody. Even the sheriffs will tell you, you can't arrest your way out of this problem. Mm-hmm. We have to do something else. That's going to require a major commitment from Albany, and that includes funding. And I'm ready to go down there and do some kicking and screaming to get that done. So that kind of brings me to here, and we've announced we're out at the petitioning stage now, and looking to get organized and get going.
So the feedback, what has the feedback been like? Obviously, you mentioned a lot of issues. We're going to be talking about some of those issues in this half hour or so conversation, but what's been the feedback so far? What are the things that are really sticking out to voters from what you've seen?
A lot of voters don't know what the record is. There just hasn't been a lot of noise about a particular bill or a particular success. I mean, I know it's reported. I follow it, but not everyone does. So a lot of people are surprised when I tell them things like she voted to repeal this protections for women. They didn't know that. I tell them she voted against the Excelsior Act scholarship, and they're surprised at that. So there's a lot of education that has to be done. I'm still getting even stronger feedback against the landfills. The gas plant down in Watkins Glen has kind of been quiet. They're not making a lot of waves right now, but they haven't gone away. So that's important. And we're still getting problems with blue-green algae, which is not an easy problem. And I know that the state has stepped up and is beginning to fund treatment plants in Auburn, and I think there's going to be one in Waterloo. But I haven't seen the strong effort on prevention that there needs to be. So those are all the issues that were there before are still there, and there doesn't seem to be much traction toward a solution. And, I mean, so that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. Now, what would you say? What's different this time around, or what has changed in your estimation over the last 2 years that makes this race maybe a little more interesting, maybe a little more compelling than the first time around?
Well, the first thing, of course, is she has a record now. I mean, all of us candidates had things to say about what we would do when we went down there when she got the chance to show us. So she has a record now. I don't think it's real impressive, and I tend to speak about that record because I think it should have been rather different than it has been. So that's different. She has a record and she owns it. The second thing is, frankly, from I guess you'd call it a management standpoint, we learned a lot about how to run a campaign. A friend of mine has told me once that the problem with experience is that you don't have it until after you needed it. And that was really the case. I learned a lot about how to run a campaign and things not to do, things to do better, and so on. So we're applying those lessons this time. We have an earlier start and a better start, and I think you're going to see a much more robust and I would say aggressive, but let's say proactive in a positive way campaign.
Now, obviously, you've had a lot of time serving the local communities. What do you take from that experience? Obviously, 4 terms as town supervisor is one thing, but also decades in volunteering and first responding. What do you take from that experience that lends itself well to what you want to do in Albany?
Well, first I grew up with a tradition of community service. My father was on the school board for 27 years. I don't know how many years he was in the fire department, but we've got a picture of him taking delivery of the 1949 Rio, and he was in the department then, so probably earlier than that. So there's a tradition of community service, and the idea that if you want to get things done, you have to go do them. You can't just call somebody and expect it to happen. We have to do it ourselves. And then secondly, in my experience in the fire department, in the school board, and so on, we find that if you build a team around a really good issue, you can make progress. And we see some of the results of that. So it's not just beating your head against the wall because you think you've got a good idea. It's actually figuring out how to make it happen. And I've had some successes in that realm and want to bring that to the campaign and to Albany, knowing how to get things done. The third thing is these good things don't happen by themselves. You can't sit back and expect somebody else to do it. They're not going to do it. I have to go do it, and I have to build a team and go get it done. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of kicking and screaming and persistence. But if you do that, you can be successful.
So probably one of the more politically divisive times now present than was even 2 years ago. How do you connect with those who might be feeling a little despondent or discouraged or just straight up uninterested in politics given the current political landscape?
Well, apathy is a tough thing to deal with. There was a lot of discouragement and astonishment on the Democratic side of the aisle after the 2016 elections. I was encouraged to find that the way people responded. After the election, I went around to the various Democratic committees in the 54th and met with them, talked to them, and I found that everywhere I went, every county, every town, every city had new members of the committee, and they were there and they said, I was just so aghast at the results of the election, I understood I had to get involved, and they did.
Right.
So then all the committees have new members and they're energized. So 2017 rolls around and they go to the polls with candidates, and just about every committee had successes at the polls. Mm-hmm. In Wayne County, we flipped 2 towns from Republican to Democrat. So I'm no longer the only Democratic supervisor on an otherwise all Republican town board. There's another now. And we also won the DA's race, which I'm pretty sure you covered, mm-hmm. With the help of the Conservative Party, who took a deep breath and then voted for good government over mm-hmm. partisanship, to their credit. So that's the first ever Democratic DA elected. And I know Seneca Falls had successes, Lansing had successes, Geneva, Canandaigua, everywhere they had successes. So people decided they had to get involved. They did. They had success doing that. And now we're rolling around to 2018. There's reason for optimism. So I want to take that lesson and deliver it at the polls.
So for the Republican voters who might be watching, where's some of the crossover, I guess, would be the question, because that's often what a lot of those middle of the road voters are looking for, right? They're looking for those items that they say, well, that's important enough to me to be something that I'm willing to cross the line for. How do you get people across the party line?
My approach, and especially in the Wayne County board, but also at the town board, and remember, I have an all-Republican town board, mm-hmm. And it's a majority Republican town, and I just try to set partisanship aside and say, okay, the election's over, the partisanship is there, now we're governing, mm-hmm. and we need to focus on really practical solutions in the middle. That doesn't resonate with everyone, but it seems to resonate with enough that if you're willing to set partisanship aside, then you can get to a solution. I believe that there are plenty of what I call reasonable Republicans out there, not ideologues, that we can talk to them about issues and how to get real results. I think that will resonate with them. You never know till the end, but there are some important issues we have that are really nonpartisan issues. And I mentioned a couple of the opioid problem. That's not an urban problem. It's in the rural areas. I still ride. I really take ambulance calls still, and I personally have had drug overdose cases that I've had to deal with in the middle of the night. And so mm-hmm. it's even in a small town. The issue of violence against women is everywhere. And as a paramedic, I've been in the labor camps and the houses and the trailers and taking care of those victims. That's not unique to the urban area. That's everywhere. So we have to deal with everywhere. That's a nonpartisan issue. The environment, I never knew there was partisanship to the environment. I mm-hmm. mean, we all want clean air and clean water, whether you're Republican or Democrat. And then we haven't talked much about education at this point, but education is still underfunded. And I would like to see even more funding for kids going off to college so they don't have to graduate with this new indenture of mm-hmm. Student loans. To me, those are all nonpartisan issues. If we can just dial down the emotion a little bit and look for a practical solution in the middle, we'll get there.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the suggestions or talking points, I guess it would be within the opioid epidemic, is this concept of safe injection sites. Is that, as a first responder, I'm genuinely curious what your perspective is when you hear ideas like that floated around, as somebody who's taken those ambulance calls, who's had to deal with that time and time and time again. Does that concern you? That type of approach?
Well, that strikes me. That strikes me as a Band-Aid approach. I'm not wild about that idea. Yeah. I'm thinking more about getting people into treatment immediately. Mm-hmm. That requires changing some rules.
Right.
whether they're insurance company rules or state rules. And I'll go back to my experience. I used to work in alcoholism treatment and the sobering up station, and the rule was you couldn't go into the sobering up station as a client unless you'd actually been drinking. So people would bring someone in and say, I know he's going to drink tonight. He knows he's going to drink tonight. Can you just sit on him here so he doesn't drink? And the rule was no. And, well, it didn't take too long to figure out that was a foolish rule. But it was based on federal funding, so you had to go through a whole process to change it. Well, it's changed now. But that same sort of thing is happening with drug treatment. If they're clean now and not using drugs, they can't get a treatment bed. And the same logic applies. That's a foolish rule. So we need to change some rules to get people into the treatment system. And then we need greater capacity for the treatment system. And that's going to take money. But it's money well spent because people can turn their lives around with the right treatment, because it is an addiction. An addiction is a disease. It's not a moral failing. So, and there are success stories out there we can point to. So we really need to do that.
Is the cost savings in terms of what it would reduce as far as burden goes on the healthcare system now? Is that one of the things that doesn't really get talked about enough? Because, it would be an investment, but wouldn't we also be saving money in the long term based on reduced emergency room visits and things like that for those who are dealing with anything in the opioid epidemic realm?
You would think so. I'm not sure that it's been studied comprehensively to get a good number on it, but logic says that it would. And we have examples from alcoholism treatment, which, alcohol is still the drug of choice, and we can't forget that. But there are plenty of others, and we've learned a lot from alcoholism treatment to apply there, and that's one of them. If you turn their life around, then they're not going to be using the healthcare system as much as they were. They still need an aftercare program, but that's a much more manageable situation.
So as far as the environment goes, the newest or latest issue, I guess you'd say, is the proposed incinerator in Romulus. Your perspective on that? Obviously, landfills are still the big environmental challenge here in this district, but a $365 million incinerator, also kind of problematic when you think about the tonnage of trash that would be coming in additionally on top of the landfills. Your perspective? Well,
my feeling is that incinerator should not be built. If it is going to be built, certainly not here. If it's such a wonderful thing to incinerate all this New York City trash, then let them put it in Brooklyn, and have the jobs there. And if the air is really that clean afterwards, then there won't be a problem. But we don't need it here, and I think it's going to be harmful here. They don't talk too much about the water from Seneca Lake it's going to involve. They don't talk too much about the heavy metals that are probably going to be coming out of the smokestack. I'm just absolutely opposed to that. And I think that you have to fold that into this, what's now becoming a bushel basket of trash problems. The 3 landfills, the incinerator, the gas plant is not trash, but it's certainly an important environmental issue. And we just need some decisive action on this. And I think that has to happen in Albany with a statewide, the DEC waste management plan. And I don't see anyone really trying to get to that root cause. And I think the senator should.
Right. It's
not enough to just say, okay, I'm opposed to it. You have to go actually do something that gains traction, and I don't see that happening.
So how do you, one of the continued gripes about Albany in general is the sort of bogged down nature of it. Things don't get done, or changes that people would like to see, like ethics reforms, don't seem to get any traction. How does that get tackled? Obviously, one person can't go in and change it by themselves. But what more can be done to sort of get the ball rolling?
Well, look at the numbers. Right now, the number favors any Democrat who gets elected from a Republican district who then becomes a swing voter. And if it's 31-31 and you're the number 32 on either side of the aisle, depending on how you vote, then you've got some leverage to go influence that bill. And this is an opportunity right here. Senator Helming has that opportunity, and she's not used it. I intend to. And that means you could probably get the bill modified to be more favorable. You could probably extract some more money for this area. That's a really good position to be in, to be a swing vote and not owe anything to the Albany power brokers, which I don't.
Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of economic development, obviously the Finger Lakes has been on a positive path generally over the last 10, 15 years. What do you see on that front that could be helped along more in Senate if you were elected and chosen to represent?
It's difficult for government to create jobs unless you just go out and hire people like they did in the New Deal, and I'm not proposing that. But government can create the conditions where businesses want to be, and that includes rebuilding the infrastructure, and that includes broadband, universal broadband around the area. I'd like to see it for the whole state. It'd be great if they'd start here. And take a good look at some of the rules that the businessmen say hamstring them. Now, sometimes rules are there for a good reason, sometimes they're just there. And one of the things that I would expect to do is create a business advisory council and ask that question of the businessmen: what rules do you find are real impediments to you? And I think if you ask the winery owners, they would have a whole list of regulations that get in their way about shipping and sales and packaging and so on. They could detail better than I could. And that's one of the ways government can get out of the way of business. And I don't think there's any harm to the public in that way.
Mm-hmm. Now, one industry that's been really challenged as of late in recent years, ag. What is it in terms of the agriculture industry that can continue to be helped by New York State to sort of offset some of the just industry challenges, prices in various markets, that sort of thing, to keep progress moving forward for them so that especially the small farms, which there are plenty of in the 54th District, can continue to thrive in future generations? Well,
ag is now a world industry, right. And it's amazing to me that we can grow soybeans here and ship them halfway around the world and still make money on them, but I guess they do. But now you're crossing the international boundaries and you're into the tariff question. And so part of that problem occurs in Washington, or at least has to be dealt with in Washington. And you're dealing with probably an uneven playing field because there are plenty of child laborers in other countries. They don't have the stringent environmental rules that we have and the health and safety rules that we have. So that's where Washington can help us out a little bit. I can't make commitments on that. I can just tell you my attitude on that. At the state level, I think you'll find that most farmers are heavily in debt, and they're always in debt. And so access to capital, especially low-cost capital, would be good. And I think we should think about seriously having a revolving fund for farmers that would provide for zero-interest loans. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're always borrowing money to buy their seeds, to buy their fertilizer, their pesticides. If we can bring down the cost of borrowing money for them, and that wouldn't necessarily be a cost to the taxpayer because it's going to get repaid. But if we can make it 0% interest, that will help farmers on their bottom line. Mm-hmm. Something has to be done with the milk prices. And as a consumer, I don't want to pay more at the supermarket, and nobody does. But in a competitive marketplace, they've got to be able to get a decent price for that. Mm-hmm. Or not only do the farms go under, but the whole industry could go under. And the part of the problem is the large urban areas have enough buying power, they can bring in food from anywhere.
Right.
So they don't think they have a stake in New York agriculture, and we have to make them understand that they do. So there's a little bit of education that has to go on there as well. And we didn't even talk about farm workers. That really has to be dealt with at the federal level, but the workforce has to be there. And these people are trying to work for a living. We've always thought that was a good thing. Mm-hmm. So we should make it possible to do that.
Now, one of the issues that I really wanted to get your thoughts on was we've seen a lot of headlines over the last 4, 5, 6, 7 months. Different municipalities struggling to find volunteers to fill first responder roles. Mm-hmm. As a first responder, as somebody who could potentially be representing an entire district of first responders in Albany, what is your sense of the dynamic and how it's changed? And people may not have as much time to volunteer like they once did, but what are these organizations and entities supposed to do?
Well, you hit on a couple of variables, but people don't have as much. It doesn't seem like they have as much time as they used to have to volunteer to take the calls. Training requirements have gone up, whether you're on the medical side or not. Even the fire training requirements have gone up. They've also hardened the rules, and I made an issue of this last time. I don't know how many people heard it, but I'll give you an example. Many years ago when I joined the department, the old guys, as I call them, who were experienced truck drivers, they took us to each truck, they showed us how to drive it, they showed us how to run it. The pumpers, they taught us how to run the pumpers, run the tanker, all of the trucks. And then when we met the chief's satisfaction to that, we were allowed to do that. Now, the state has said all that training that I have has evaporated, doesn't count. If I want to drive a pumper, I have to take the state pump operator course in order to be able to operate it once I get it there. And I'm not allowed to drive it to get it there if I can't operate it once I get it there. And the old guys are not allowed to teach me. So the state said, it's not a bad course, it's a good course. Right. But what they're saying is the state has a monopoly on this knowledge, and you have to get it from the state. To me, that's a bureaucratic impediment that harms the local departments. People show up, and they're not allowed to operate. That's just a bureaucratic obstacle, and that could go away in Albany. That's part of the answer.
Yeah. Now, obviously, we're getting towards the end of our half hour here. For those who might just be joining us, or for those who just may be catching this at a glance, what are the key points to your campaign, and how can people connect with you and get involved over the next several months as you move through this process?
I'm arguing that, just try to put this in a nutshell, the ethics issues have not gone away. They're as strong as before. And my plan going forward is to introduce legislation to prohibit outside income for senators and possibly assemblymen, to have a certain, and I mean definite, pension forfeiture for those convicted of corruption, and to close the LLC loophole to get some of this money out of the political process. So that's ethics, and none of that has been attempted. I will vote to keep the SAFE Act. I would like to modify it to make it better, but I'm not going to repeal these important protections for people. I'm going to go work directly on the statewide waste management plan to deal with these landfills as best I can and prevent the incinerator from being built. And I'm not sure how we're going to get our arms around this, but we have to get our arms around this opioid problem. And I think that's going to include quite a bit more funding for treatment beds and the whole downstream treatment system. That's going to be expensive in the short run, but we have to do it. So that's really the short story. And there are many other issues I'll be articulating. People want to get involved. My Facebook page is up, Kenan Baldridge. It's for State Senate NY 54. Please like and share. We'll have a web page up soon, and we'll be out and about all throughout the district.
All right.
So if you want to get involved, call me, 315-587-9627. I'll be glad to hear from you.
All right. Well, I appreciate you stopping by, making the time for us, and best of luck moving forward as you go through this lengthy process. I know you're going to be busy.
I will be. Glad to do it. Thank you.
All right, well, that is going to do it for us today. I'd like to thank Supervisor Baldridge, our listeners, and, of course, FingerLakes1.com for making this program possible. You can catch Inside the FLX on Saturdays during the 10 o'clock hour on WDWN 89.1 FM in Auburn or 97.7 FM in Fulton. The program also airs Sundays and Tuesdays at 7 p.m. on Spectrum, channel 1304, and is available on iTunes, Stitcher, and the FingerLakes1.com app. Until next time, stay informed, Finger Lakes.